My name's Jeanne Fekade-Sellassie. I'm the Executive Director of Funders for Housing and Opportunity. We're a national funder collaborative working to repair harm caused by our country's racist housing systems. And if any of you took a walk today or yesterday, you might have noticed that there are people on the street who live there. And in the Bay Area, I think the last count said 38,000 people in the Bay Area are experiencing homelessness on any given night. But homelessness is really just a symptom of multiple systems that have failed individuals. And so today we're here to talk with some folks who are doing something about it, who understand homelessness as a symptom of bigger issues, and are working across systems, private, public, to address this issue. I would like to ask each of you to introduce yourselves. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves in 3 sentences, if you can. So first, your personal connection to San Francisco or the Bay Area. Secondly, your organization's mission or motivation for the work. And then third, how your kind of grant-making or giving model works. So who would like to go first?
I guess, well, maybe we're starting my geographic proximity, because my connection to San Francisco is I live 10 minutes from here. So that's my opening piece, and I've been in San Francisco since 1990 and served in local elected office in the 90s, which also influences my thinking here. I already forgot your second question.
Your organization's mission or motivation.
So I do work in 2 strands. One is public opinion, writing, communication through Democracy in Color, and then the other is donor activism through Sandler Phillips Center. And I think the common strand and thread of those is really about building the power to bring about social and economic justice. And so that's really what my focus has been. How do we go about doing that and to create the policy changes that can improve people's lives? And
in your giving, so how does that work?
So in my mind, I had all the answers when you first read them. Where I'm at very much in terms of the giving is focusing on trying to identify and empower and back talented leaders. And that I had done this whole process of analyzing our philanthropy with my wife in terms of looking at including people are more important than strategies or plans, and that what lasts and what is the highest return and intervention point is finding and backing talented individuals.
All right, I guess I'm up next. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Tamika Moss, and I'm really excited to be in this conversation this morning. My special connection to San Francisco is love. I came to California for love, and that love is still lasting 20 years later. But I started my work actually in the Tenderloin neighborhood of San Francisco, just over here. For those of you who may not know the neighborhood, it's one of the neighborhoods that has the most children in the neighborhood. And I started as a social worker working in the single-room occupancy hotels, where we worked to make sure that extremely low-income folks stayed housed, that they had the services that they needed. And as I worked in that community and organized in that community for almost a decade, I realized that it was really important that for the hundreds of lives that I was impacting, the systems that were creating the conditions for poverty and homelessness to exist in the first place were abundant. And it was really important for me to take a systems and policy approach. Doing direct service work is where my heart is, but really making sure that there are fewer people having to experience this crisis in the first place was really the motivation for me to start All Home, which is to your second question. I've worked in the Bay Area, both in government and the nonprofit sector for more than 20 years now, and we really were trying to solve this problem one place at a time. San Francisco is not going to resolve its homelessness and housing crisis on its own. The Bay Area actually has to function as a region. And so our organization really takes a regional approach to these issues. How do we bring collaboration, coordination, resources at scale across the entire 9-county Bay Area? If we aren't thinking about it holistically in that way, I think we continue to, have the challenges that we have in every community in the Bay Area. And then I think the third question around our giving, so the way we think about our funding is to catalyze innovative solutions that we can scale. We want to pilot, we want to really think about what are the solutions that work, how do we demonstrate to the public sector that they work, how do we demonstrate to philanthropy that they work, and then scale them. And so we have really spent a lot of our collaborative funding in homelessness prevention. The challenge we have, and then I'll pass it over to Sam, is that for every one person that we house here in the Bay Area, 3 more become homeless during the same period of time. So we know actually how to house and support people once they're housed, but what we aren't dealing with is the economic inequality, the income inequality, the severe shortage of deeply affordable housing in our region, and the political and social will that we need to scale the interventions that work.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite. Since I'm a product of the Mississippi public school system, I'm going to give you my 3 sentences as 3 run-on sentences. And so, again, I am Sam Cobbs. I'm the CEO of Tipping Point Community based here in the Bay Area. We are a philanthropic organization modeled after Robin Hood in New York. I see my colleague over there, Richard. Richard and his staff are often nice and say, oh, our sister organizations. I actually say the kids of Robin Hood because we have adopted their model. And part of their model is that we have a fabulous board. Some of them, my board members are in the room today, who underwrite all of our operating costs. We raise all of our money, and every cent that we raise goes out into the community, to those organizations who are on the front lines trying to measurably reduce poverty in the Bay Area. And so we have been proud to fund, to be at the front line and seed capital for some of the largest innovations and best interventions that are happening now across the nation. You know, all of our funding is unrestricted. We do a lot of capacity building and trying to build the infrastructures for the organizations that we serve. We believe that our grantees know how to spend the money that we're giving them best, and so it is not for us to decide how that goes. My special place in the Bay Area, really, I often say that I was born and raised in the Mississippi Delta, but I was made by the Bay. And so the Bay is what helped me understand how resilient I was when I hit a rough patch and was homeless myself. The Bay helped me understand, helped me find my passion for what it was that I wanted to do, and not just the mission of my organization, but my life mission. The Bay also helped me find my voice and understand how to use that voice to advance my passion. And I often say that we don't work on behalf of people who don't have voices. We work on behalf of people who can't get in this room to use them. And so that's what the Bay Area has done for me. That's what San Francisco has done for me. And so I love the Bay Area. And so one of the things that I've said before is that you only fight for what it is that you love. And I'm here to fight for this region because it has given me a lot. And I love it, and I want to make sure that it is here, not only for my kids, but for your kids as well, to enjoy this beautiful place that I now call home.
Thank you for those beautiful run-on sentences. My first question is for Tamika. Homelessness here is a very persistent and visible problem. And we know that homelessness in America is a very racialized experience and is the byproduct of so many underlying root causes like income inequality you talked about, educational equity, healthcare, and so on. I'm wondering if you can give us kind of the bird's eye view of the complexity of the situation here in the Bay Area and kind of what All Home is doing to address it.
Yeah, I think the first thing that we talk about both my team, one of the things that I espouse to the public is that homelessness is actually solvable. We'll just pause on that. It is actually solvable. But we have to believe and have a vision for what it takes to get us there. And I have a feeling that the Bay Area, particularly communities where homelessness has persisted, like San Francisco, it was really never designed to solve it. We have been maintaining the challenge for a really long time. People coming in, trying to get services, trying to get housing, but we haven't actually built enough infrastructure at scale to solve the problem. So the first thing is to know that it is not an intractable problem, and that in fact, if we made changes, prioritize resources in the solutions that work, we could actually solve it. So I think it's really important for folks to understand that so that we don't throw our hands up and wonder why the problem is getting worse. We actually have agency, we have hundreds of organizations and people who are doing incredible work every single day to tackle this issue. So that's the first thing. I think the other thing in terms of the bird's eye view is we have a housing affordability crisis in California, full stop. And housing is the solution to homelessness. It's not housing only. We know that people need the supportive services, that homelessness and the trauma of that crisis has inflicted on folks. But we also know that if we do not have deeply affordable housing that people can afford with the incomes that they have, it's a math problem. This isn't a, is Tamika addicted to substances or has a mental health issue? This is, I'm earning $15 to $16 an hour, which is actually about the income of about 1 million people in our region, by the way, and not being able to afford the rent that it might cost $3,200 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment, which is what it costs here in San Francisco. So I think it's important to really understand what challenge are we actually trying to tackle. If we're just pointing our fingers at the individuals who are experiencing the crisis as if it is their fault, then we're actually not able to go upstream and look at, do we have competitive family-sustaining wages for people to earn in order to afford the housing that they want to live in? Do we have resilient, responsive communities and supportive services for those folks who need those things? And then I think the last thing I'd say is, if we aren't willing to address the racial inequities that center around this issue and really call them out, we didn't get here accidentally. And those who are most impacted, Black, Indigenous folks in particular, should be at the center of the solution as we try to figure out what we need to do to address our housing and homelessness crisis. So I think it's really important to center folks with lived experiences in the way that we try to solve the challenges, recognize that housing affordability is happening for everyone, but it's most acute for those with extremely low incomes. And if we are able to coalesce around a set of strategies that we know work, that are data-driven, I think we can make a real dent in this crisis, and we don't have to resolve that this is just society's challenge and not our own individual challenges that we can actually resolve.
Thank you. Steve, Sam, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to underline what Tamika said about the issue is solvable. And so a lot of times we talk a lot about homelessness or education as, you know, can we transform or reform the education system? Can we solve homelessness? And as Tamika said, with homelessness, we know it can be solved. We see it solved every day. We see it solved every day. But do we have what it is that we need at scale with the intentionality to solve it? You know, according to ChatGPT, which I put it in this morning, when we think about one of the feeders and one of the areas that we haven't done enough in our public education system to prevent further upstream to prevent this from happening, according to ChatGPT, the Bay Area has not only the #1 ranked and rated public high school in California, but in the country. That's like maybe about 20 miles that way. But we also have the lowest ranked public high school in California, which is about 15 miles that way. And so it is not complex to look at what this school has versus what this school does not have. We don't have to do a whole lot of reports on what needs to be done to transform this school. We just replicate what's happening at this school. And what you'll see what's happening at this school is teacher pay is better. Adult to kid ratio is better. Extracurricular activities are there. Environment around the school is different. And so we don't have to always create new things to solve old problems. We just have to have the will to replicate what is already out there. And so it is not that complex. It is also not very complex around the demographics of that public school neighborhood that has been redlined, in the demographics of this public school neighborhood that has not.
I had warned the organizers that I have a risk of being a bomb thrower, but it's in the context of, I've been doing philanthropy for 25, 30 years, created our first donor-advised fund at the San Francisco Foundation in the mid-late 1990s. And I guess my particular point, the reason why I wanted to come here to be part of this conversation was frankly to challenge people engaged in philanthropy to think more broadly, more deeply, and more courageously. That there are things that philanthropy can do and say that others cannot, who are more worried about. I mean, you work literally in the space with money. Who is going to expand our conception and our thinking around what we could actually be and do as a society? The danger and the risk, and frankly, the danger and risk concern I have about efforts that are, many of the philanthropic gatherings that I go to, is that there can be a focus around tinkering around the edges, around trying to improve our tinkering, so we tinker in a little bit better and more coordinated fashion, but we don't get at the fundamental issues. So we have heard already, there are solutions. It's not like we don't know how to go about dealing with homelessness and housing issues, but it is a question of will. And so this gets to, I think, the question of philanthropy. What kind of society do we want to have? What are the priorities that we should have? And what is our vision and conception around how we should be functioning in that? So use the example of universal basic income, right? Martin Luther King talked about this, said the best solution in terms of addressing poverty is to end poverty. Not to find all the different programs that actually get it, but to provide a guaranteed basic income. Radical concept, et cetera. Michael Tubbs in Stockton, Michael Tubbs piloted a guaranteed income program. There's now 100 mayors across the country. But again, still the kind of radical, interesting, innovative concept. Then a global pandemic hits. And then the government provides checks to virtually every single American in the country, as well as massive checks to most of the corporations within the country. So somebody said when those first pandemic money went out, someone said, the first $1 trillion piece, they're like, so we could afford reparations, right? So, but those are the things I think philanthropy should be challenging, is to lift up the question, what is the structure of our society? What are the underlying values and principles? And not just the question about how do we do this program better, expand it a little bit more, but how committed as we are as a society to ending poverty, because we do know how to do that, and who's going to be doing the investing to put that concept in front of the American people.
Thank you. Thank you. Sam, let's take it local. So that same question, what does it take here locally? What are some of the things that you have been doing at Tipping Point, lessons, things you've tried, lessons you've learned to move that needle?
Yeah, so as we think about collaborative funds or re-granters or intermediaries, one of the things by working local, and I've had the opportunity to work on national issues before, is the ability to be proximate to what it is that you're trying to solve. That you're proximate not only to the issue, but you're proximate to the leaders who are working hard every day and who often have the best ideas around how do you actually solve this issue. And so the ability to be proximate, the ability to listen, the ability to learn, the ability to invest dollars in creative, courageous leaders that first put together interventions and programs to solve something locally, but now are doing the same thing and doing it and replicating nationally and have become the national forefront of that. And so I think that's what doing it locally gets you. And so some of the lessons that we've learned, which I think will either confirm what Steve is saying or not, is that philanthropy can't solve it. What we've learned locally is that philanthropy can't solve it, that we can have some great programs if we work around government, but if we actually want to solve some of our issues, we have to work with government. We have to help transform those systems and those policies and remove those policies that have created and sustained the problems or the issues that we're trying to solve today. And so there is no leaving government out of the room, right? So I don't know how many philanthropic dollars that we have, but I know it doesn't come close to matching the budget of the federal government. I don't know how many philanthropic institutions are in San Francisco, but I do know that I think the city just passed a $4 billion budget. So when it comes to scale of resources, when it comes to scale of reach, you need government to do that work. Part of our chronic homeless initiative, one of the things that we were proud to be able to do, it costs a lot to build housing here in San Francisco. We were able to build a house, build a unit, build a building, where still very expensive, was two-thirds of the cost to build similar. And so what in real numbers, at that time it was estimated that it cost us $600,000 to build one unit of affordable housing. $600,000. When I first heard that number, I was like, hey, I live in Pittsburgh, I got a house for you. I definitely did pay $600,000 for it, and I know you could get more than one unit out of it. $600,000 to build one unit, and it often takes 7 years. We were able to do it for about $425,000, and it took us 3 years. Why? Because we use innovative building models. We use modular housing, all 100% union built by our union brothers and sisters in Vallejo, California, and shipped here to the Bay Area, shipped to San Francisco and stacked. And it only took us 3 years because, not because we used modular, but because we had private capital. And private capital was allowed to work around government. But we haven't been able to replicate that. Why? Because we needed to work with government. And so for all of the conferences that philanthropy has, unless you're including the people who have the biggest purse strings, the people who control the policy, then we're just, as Steve said, tinkering around the edges, because we can create those solutions, but only government can scale them. Scale is not getting it to 1 million people. Scale is getting it to everyone who needs it. And that's what happened during the pandemic. We helped create, we were working on what does it take to increase earned income tax and how do we get money out to people. And government saw that philanthropy had already created the plan, and it was able to scale that during the pandemic. Regardless of how many years we worked, philanthropy would have never been able to scale it.
Thank you. Tamika, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, right on. Just building on both Steve and Sam's comments about the role of government. So during the pandemic, there was actually a 40% reduction in child poverty because of the child care tax credit that the federal government administered across the nation. And yet, we couldn't get it together to expand the child care tax credit. And now in the state of California in just 1 year. Now, this was 1 year, a 40% reduction. And in the subsequent year, we've had a 22% increase in childhood poverty here in the state of California. So both to Steve and Sam's point, we know that government can scale impact quickly, and if it's the society that they want to have, right, then it's not a question of how do we end child poverty? Unclear. We actually don't know. That's not true. And I think the role of philanthropy is to not only utilize resources to advance some of the work that's happening on the ground, but to use your voice in advocacy and policy spaces to make sure that the policymakers don't, it's not acceptable for us to tinkle around the edges. People are literally losing their lives while we move around the deck chairs on policy changes that, because the problem has gotten so big in California, we are intimidated by the price tag. That to me, I think, creates a lot of the paralysis around going big. If you, that $600,000 a unit that Sam talked about, it's now $1 million in some parts of California. So that would cost a whole lot of money to get to scale. So we have to be able to challenge our policymakers, work with our policymakers, and encourage them to really do solutions at scale. And we got them, right? There are 171,000 people in our state, y'all, experiencing homelessness on any given night. We are the 4th largest economy in the world. We actually just beat out Germany. I don't know if y'all saw that headline, okay? 40% of the GDP for the entire state of California comes from the Bay Area. So when we talk about resources, it's really important to challenge how, in fact, those resources are being used, who are they being used for, and that is an incredible role that philanthropy can do in calling the question to our policymakers and making them be accountable and partnering with us to solve these challenges.
If I could just pick up on this and may offer a couple of examples for somehow this can actually manifest itself. And so, it's the richest state and the richest country in the history of the world in terms of what we could actually solve. This is where I feel like the role of philanthropy comes in. What ideas are we lifting up? What solutions are we pointing to? How are we expanding the debate? We could end hunger in California with a wealth tax on not even just the top 1%, but maybe it's like the top 1,000 people in the state. And we could end hunger. The numbers have actually been calculated in terms of what that actually would look like. And so is that concept being put into the public space? Are people being invested in to write about that and develop it and talk about it, et cetera? So I think that that's an example, manifesting this piece. This piece about the, not just partnering with, but leveraging government in terms of being able to move this. I don't do environmental work. It hasn't been my focus in terms of philanthropic work. I feel very good about what I have done to contribute to the environmental cause because for the past decade, I've been deeply involved in civic engagement and voter registration, increasing voter turnout in the state of Georgia. And because the Georgia electorate changed, Georgia then wound up sending to the United States Senate the literal successor to Martin Luther King to serve in the Senate, Raphael Warnock, which then changed the public policy priorities of the Senate to pass one of the most comprehensive climate pieces of legislation we've ever had. So this is a leveraging piece. And just the very specific idea, lastly, I just want to put out, I think that, again, philanthropy can help to lift up in terms of leveraging these resources. San Francisco does have a $4 billion annual budget. Also has $4 billion in pension funds. That's money that has to be invested somewhere. And then how are we looking at creative ways and solutions to leverage that set of resources? Which is, I came of age in the Rainbow Coalition in the 80s when Jesse used to talk about, that's actually the workers' money. In that they have actually done the work to get that money created, which then has to be invested. So then can we take those resources, leverage them? Can you provide low-cost, accessible mortgages to teachers and firefighters and public officials to be able to work in their communities? Can you leverage that money to be able to build affordable housing in ways that can have a return to maintain the pension fund as well? But those concepts, I feel like, are not sufficiently salient in the public policy discussion in this country. And I think it's because of a lot of timidity and fear about the whole political landscape. It's a whole separate conversation we could have. But I think it's a role that philanthropy can play, is to put into play ideas that are actually quite doable, but there's not a great deal of momentum behind. And I think that is what I talk about in terms of philanthropy, having the courage to be able to transform the conversation that we're having.
So let's talk about that a little bit. You speak and write a lot about the social fabric of the country and the challenges and divides and lack of empathy. And I think for any funder in the room today, regardless of issue that they're working on, they're working with multiple viewpoints and trying to bring together multiple perspectives. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts about what it takes to bridge those kind of ideological perspective divides.
Oh, I have thoughts, but the let's call a quick story. So Connie Schultz is a writer in Ohio, and she wrote this piece about, this is maybe 10 years or so. She was in a cab, but she was talking to this cab driver during the Obama administration, and this person was like attacking Obama, et cetera. And then she was saying, she kind of moved the conversation along, and then that person's wife had been ill and had needed medical assistance, and they needed health care insurance, and they availed themselves of Obamacare. And then she points that out to me. She's like, well, I guess there's one good thing that he's done. And I say that to say, I fundamentally believe that it's far more effective and important to deal with building power than it is about persuasion. And it's far more important to change the people who are in power rather than to try to change the minds of the people who are in power. And that, I feel, is how you get at this issue of the divide. I don't think that change is going to come through us having a meeting of the minds and then change will come. And I use the Obama example, and the Obamacare example. It wasn't that he united everybody to say, yes, we should all have universal health care. He did the work to become the president of the United States. And then he delivered a public policy that benefited everybody, including those who were even against him and who were on the other side of the divide. But this country was better, and even those people were better because of the public policies. So my work has been about demonstrating that there is what I call a new American majority of people who want there to be a more progressive public policy vision and priorities for the country, and that we need to give those people the tools to be powerful and influential. And then they'll pass policies which will, in practice, bridge this divide. But it's not the other way around. I think if we spend too much time trying to change all these people's minds, we're never going to get to the solutions that people so desperately need.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been talking about, over the last 9 months is this whole concept of a radical collaboration and what it is that we need to do. There's a think tank in Stanford and called the Future of Society, I believe is the name of it. And one of the authors came out and he said, a few years ago, he said that, we are done with problems in our country. We have solved all of the problems that we have to solve. Now what we have are dilemmas. And there is no clear answer or way to solve a dilemma, that you actually have to, understand what your trade-offs are. And so in the future, we're going to need to understand what it is our trade-offs are, what our trade-offs are if we want to come to grips with some of the dilemmas. Example of a dilemma. We love low-cost stuff in our country. We love to not have to pay a whole lot of money for stuff. But we also want people to make a livable wage. That is not a problem, that is a dilemma. Because the solution to the problem is outsourcing jobs. If we want low costs. But we want jobs to stay here. And so we have a dilemma, which means that we have to give something up. And so this whole concept of how are we going to win-win? How do you create a win-win? No, we're out of win-wins. We're now in the lose-lose. What is it that you and I are willing to sacrifice? What is it that we're willing to give up for the collective to be better? And so I think part of one of the things that you know from power is that power actually does not work in the corporate, in the government sector and in the nonprofit sector. It does not work because power is too diffused. It is too diffused. You have to have leadership. You have to have influence. And true leadership is getting people to go in a direction when they have free will to go somewhere else. And so in order to do that, we are going to have to change some minds. And I totally believe in this coming from the segregated South. Never did I ever think I would be in a room talking to people who look like you, telling you my ideas, but the Bay Area showed me that that was possible. And my mind got changed around what it was not only that I could do, but what it is that we could do together. And so we're done, and we need to be done with individual heroes. We need collective heroes, people who are working together to move things collectively together and not be waiting on our individual savior to come and save us.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that saying that systems aren't broken, they're actually performing exactly the way that they were designed. So we need a revolution. I mean, that we are not going to tinker enough with these existing systems to protect the people and provide opportunity for all the people who need it. So I think that there is a reality check that we have to do around what do we do in the meantime? How do we ensure that people have dignity, that people have access to safe and affordable housing, that they have access to all of the things that we believe folks deserve in our country? And yet, because of the commodification of housing, there are winners and losers. And the people who lose are those who are most vulnerable. And so until we can figure out how we demonstrate that impact is not just for those people, that impact is for all of us. We built a regional coalition of stakeholders across the 9-county Bay Area to do this work together. Business leaders, folks with lived experience, Eddie, who was on our Community Advisory Council, providers who are doing this work. It's all of our responsibility to tackle some of the challenges that are impacting our communities around housing affordability and homelessness. We don't do it alone, and we have to make sure that everybody can see themselves in the success when we do it together.
We got a little countdown clock going here too. So I think the main final point I want to make sure is lifted up, but I think it's a challenge to all of us who are in any kind of position of, philanthropy or being able to move any kind of resources, is to be reflective of and to challenge ourselves on our conception of leadership, in terms of our biases. And a quick story on that. So my next door neighbor, their daughter just went to college, and I've literally watched her grow up her whole life. And so, you have that kind of next-door neighbor relationship, you kind of know them, et cetera. And I was talking to him, she's going to school. And then he says, yeah. Background of the story is that, so I went to Stanford. He says, yeah, she's going to the farm. She's going to Stanford. And I immediately felt my attitude. I was like, oh, she's going to Stanford. I changed my conception of her. I could even feel my own biases sinking in. Well, then she's a whole different kind of person than probably I knew. So that's just real. What's the saying that we like people who are like us? And so but then when you have society that has been founded on infused with really systemic racism and sexism, the people who have the money to be able to transform systems don't necessarily look like the people who mostly need the help. So I say all of that to say we need to challenge ourselves to look at this conception of what leadership looks like. Right? Isabel Wilkerson in her book Caste says that we are all actors on a stage that was built long before we arrived, where the roles are predetermined. We know who is center stage, and we know who is in the side supporting roles. And if you think about it, we've had 46 presidents in this country, all of them men, and 45 of them white men. So the role of president in this country and in our minds is reserved largely for a white man. And then we're here in Silicon Valley, we're here in San Francisco. The role of entrepreneur is usually reserved for a young white man. And then that translates to 2% of venture capital money goes to African Americans and then the people of color, et cetera. And so it does get down to that granular piece about when someone comes to us with a proposal, where we're trying to think about who to invest in and who to back. What is our conception and what triggers our biases around who we get enthusiastic about and who we say, well, that's interesting. Would we have backed an inexperienced 26-year-old minister in Montgomery, Alabama, who had no real track record, didn't have powerful friends, but had a vision and some passion? That's who Martin Luther King was at the time of the Montgomery bus boycott. But would he have risen to the level of philanthropists talking about him at cocktail parties? Well, I met this guy, probably plot. So it's deeply ingrained in us, but particularly those of us who are in philanthropic positions, it's critical. And in my experience, it's actually been the highest leverage point, is that there are entrepreneurs who have done transformative work, but they don't look like the stereotype of who we think of as critical leaders.
Thank you. We are at time, but before I let these folks off the stage, I'm just wondering if there's one sentence you'd like to leave this group with, something about advice you have for creating the world that we know we deserve.
2024 is the year of housing. So we are running 2 campaigns, 1 state to lower the voter threshold for housing bonds, and we are running a $10 to $20 billion bond for affordable housing for the Bay Area. If you live here, if you care about this issue, it's a really exciting way to get involved. That's how you start to open up opportunity to get at scale.
The change you want starts with you. What are you going to do? Not what somebody else is going to do. What are you going to do to create the society? Are you going to use your platform, your voice? What risk are you going to take to make sure that we're living in a society that you believe and we all believe that we should live in?
Find and back leaders who look different than who you may think about. There's a saying that people of color are over-mentored and under-invested in. And you're on a stage with somebody who used to be unhoused and is now a leader in this realm. And so people in publicists and philanthropy are in a position to use that leverage, use that position, use that authority to lift up the people who have the talent but don't get the validation.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking this panel. Thank you.